Good evening, all. For those of you who've never had the somewhat dubious pleasure of seeing my face on screen before, I'm Chris Baker, the webmaster for the Black Country Society, and one of those who convenes this meeting. With me, we have Ward Jones, obviously our speaker, whom I'll introduce in a moment. Andrew Homer is down in Devon. Andrew will be sorting out the discussion after the talk, and George McFadden is looking after the recording and the technicalities of this. Those of you who've been here before, at least online, will know the system. Please, if you could keep on mute, it would really help that we don't get any extraneous noise. If you've got any questions, could you put them in the chat function, please? And Andrew will pick those up and put them to the speaker, put them to Ward after the talk. Otherwise, I think it's all very straightforward, and I hope you have a good time. We've had about 65 or more people registered for the talk, which on normal practice, that would probably mean sort of 50 plus people logging on, which is a pretty good number. Who'd have thought Gornal was so popular? But anyway, so I'd like to introduce you to Ward Jones. Ward is actually one of the conveners of this group and one of the helpers with this group, but he's going to talk today about the place where he was born and brought up, at Gornal Wood in the Black Country. Ward was for many years a Methodist minister, and he ended up, before he retired, as effectively being in charge of the Methodist Church in the West Country. I should say he presumably still is a Methodist minister indeed. And he's now retired and he's living in Chippenham, not too far away from the West Country. And that reminds me, it would be rather nice if we do it occasionally, if you could, at some point, just put into the chat box where you're actually doing this from. Where are you actually physically sitting at the moment? So we get some idea of the spread of people, and Andrew can report on that at the end as well. So Ward, could I ask you to show your face on the video, to unmute yourself, and then to share the screen as you will.
Are we there, Andrew?
You're there. I can hear
Chris,
you.
fine.
I can't see your screen yet. You need to share screen.
I thought I had done. I'm trying to get up share screen, right?
It's coming.
Yeah, we're there.
You clicked onto not the start slide, I think. Oh, you. Okay, that's it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Ward.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. From sunny Chippenham, and at least it is sunny now. It's been rain and shine and hail and everything else today, but there we are. Gornal Wood, the transformation of a Black Country village. This talk and the book that lies behind it is a project that really began something like 10 years ago now. I had a sabbatical before I finished full time in the work of the church, and decided I wanted to write a history of my home church, which is Zoe Methodist Church in Gornal Wood, which happens to be the one architecturally acceptable frontage in the whole of the village. I started to write that, and I'll come back to that right at the end of the talk. But I was sidetracked by what was life like for the people who were part of the church. What made the village tick? And a journey began, which ended up with the production of a book by the same name as the title of this talk. And so I'm going to share some snippets from the book and other bits of background material. So for those of you who don't know, here's the present day accepted boundary, as it were, of the Black Country, those 4 authorities that claim to be part of the Black Country, and nestling down towards the southwest corner is Gornal Wood, and that location is hugely significant, as you'll discover as the evening goes on. So here's a modern day map of that part of the world. You can see there are actually 3 Gornals. There's Upper Gornal, Lower Gornal, and Gornal Wood. And interestingly, and you'll see why it is interesting, today's maps, where size is everything, Gornal Wood is in bigger letters than Lower Gornal or Upper Gornal, because it is quite significantly the largest constituent part of the Gornals. And it wasn't always so, as we will see as I carry on through this talk. So I want to do a little bit of early history, because the early history is hugely significant to the fact that transformation came to this village, as it did to other parts of the Black Country as well, I know. So that name, Gornal, there are 2 constituent parts to the name Gornal. There's the quern and there's the hail, and it's generally deemed to be Old English that we're dealing with here. The quern was, as you can see in that picture, a handheld grinding tool, a quern, and that would have been used by villagers in days long gone by. And then hail is a nook or a corner belonging to a larger unit. And what we've got here in the blue circle is the heart of what is, as far as I'm concerned, Gornal Wood. And the outer larger circle is what the ecclesiastical authority would deem to be Lower Gornal, and what through time has generally been referred to as one of the constituent parts that people would always talk about. So quite often you get people talking about Lower Gornal, and certainly in earliest years that included Gornal Wood as well. That may sound rather complex and complicated, but all will be revealed as this talk goes on. Gornal Wood. Well, we're just looking here at a snippet of a map that was put together by what was at the time the Historic Environment Team of Dudley Authority, and they managed to compile, using various sources, what they thought was the sort of layout of the village of Gornal Wood, well, the whole of Lower Gornal, which includes Gornal Wood. I've put this snippet in because it focuses on the bit of the Gornals that is quite definitely Gornal Wood, and I've put it there to show you that in fact there's a huge area to the western side of the village, which was listed as coppice, and that's where the Gornal Wood comes from. The fact that this was for many years a quite rural aspect, and it had substantial forest area to it, and certainly back in the 50s and 60s, when I was growing up in the village, there was still a lot of woodland. You go out of Gornal Wood and actually still you're more or less into countryside. Those of you who know the area will know Himley and out round to Wombourne and places like that, and there's a lot of woodland still in existence. So it's important to realize that there's very little, in fact nothing at all, written about Gornal in days gone by. The ancient manor of Sedgley, which was part of the kingdom of Mercia, ruled over by King such as Offa Ethelbald and Ethelred, is where the history is written. And if you want to know what Gornal Wood was like, you have to, in the earliest years, listen to what we're told about the ancient manor of Sedgley. And the ancient manor of Sedgley was composed of 9 villages. And this map was put together by a wonderful gentleman, a great local historian in his day, Andrew Barnett, who for the first few years of my life was my headmaster at Red Hall Junior School. The sad thing is I never knew he was a historian, and it was only after he died I discovered all the work that he'd done. But the 9 constable wicks or townships of Lower Gornal in the ancient manor of Sedgley included Upper Gornal and Lower Gornal. So this was Lower Gornal, and this was Upper Gornal, and Gornal Wood in those earliest days deemed simply to be part of Lower Gornal. A rich history in the years after the Norman invasion and William's victory over Harold in 1066. The castle, Dudley Castle, was built. Some of you, I'm sure, will know the fact that Dudley Castle actually lies in the ancient manor of Sedgley. So it was never actually in Dudley when it was built. It's an interesting little outlier of the ancient manor of Sedgley. The manor was held by Earl Algar, son of Earl Lefric, and the somewhat better known Lady Godiva. So there we are. If you're a Gornal resident, Lady Godiva is part of your history. And this is a well-known picture that appears in all sorts of places, telling us what she might or might not have looked like. Fast forward to the Domesday record and the ancient manor of Sedgley, which includes, yes, Gornal. Sedgley is mentioned twice in the Domesday book. The main reference is to the significant manorial lands in the possession of William Fitzansculf, and it tells you what he actually owned. Fitzansculf was given the ancient manor as part of the booty he earned from William the Conqueror, as a consequence of the support he'd given to the invasion in 1066. And like so many others, Fitzansculf benefited from the handouts that followed the victory. We jump forward then to the days of Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries and all the associated religious establishments. This is worth reading because it's significant in terms of the development of Gornal in particular. Sir John Dudley is the guy who benefits from the handouts that Henry VIII made when he dissolved the monasteries. And there's this reference to the monastery of Wenlock, which was the monastery that had an influence over significant parts of what we know as the Black Country. And that included the priory in Dudley and lands in Sedgley. So this list, Ombourne or Wombourne, Dudley, and then it goes on to talk about the possessions of the priory, Dudley Priory, which included Sedgley, Brierley, Colsley, Woodsetton, and then a rare appearance. Now we're starting to talk about Over Gornal or Upper Gornal and Nether or Lower Gornal, and Cotwell End, which is on the edge of Gornal, and other places including Wombourne and Treacle, Orton, Seiston, and so on. So these go over to Sir John Dudley, and subsequent history shows us the significance of the Dudley family in the life of the locality. The records of the priory, Dudley Priory, were lost during the dissolution. Now, this has some interesting consequences. One or 2 points in this talk I want to put in a sort of aside, and this is one point where we start to talk about an aside. So the lands are handed over to Sir John Dudley, and then we start to talk about Over Gornal and Nether Gornal. The records are lost, and this leads to some interesting speculation. This is the village of Gornal Wood. Here's the main road from Dudley through to Himley. This is the old main road. This road was constructed by the Earls of Dudley when they erected Himley Hall, and they wanted a more direct route through from Dudley to Himley Hall. In the middle of the village, and this is the middle of the village, there is this land here and here, which was put up for sale in 1858. You'll see down here that it talks about the Abbey, and subsequently the roads either side. Sorry, I want to go back there. The roads either side are known as Abbey Street and Abbey Road. This was a farm that came right into the heart of the village and still in various ways exists as open grassland. It's a parkland in the middle of the village, which I believe part of which has recently been given permission to build houses on, which I find it quite appalling. But when you look at the land around the Abbey farmhouse, this is what you see. There is the Abbey farmhouse. This is the farmhouse as it was in the 1950s. This is the heart of the village. Those of you who know Gornal Wood, there's a library here now. This building here was knocked down in, I think, the 1930s. It was part of the old outhouses of the Abbey farm, and there's an interesting story and claim relating to this particular wall. The somewhat suspect historian Underhill, when he produced a book about the ancient manor of Sedgley, he claimed that that wall was part of an actual abbey building on the site. They were going to do some excavations around that site, and before it all happened, the wall was knocked down and it was all forgotten about. And so Underhill's claim couldn't be proved, but for that matter, it couldn't be disproved. I happen to believe that it was part of an abbey which actually existed in Gornal Wood. And the fact that the records are lost means that those in favour and those against can't prove it either way. If you want to read more about that, I wrote an article about the Abbey and the Abbey site in the spring 2019 volume of the Black Countryman. Now, we've looked at the history. One of the things that comes out as absolutely crucial in a story of transformation is the fact that this part of the Black Country in particular experienced significant isolation over centuries. One of the main reasons was that there's a lack of rivers in this locality. Here's the village of Gornal Wood. Here's the River Severn, and no means of transport other than horses and carts and legs and feet available to people who wanted to move things around. You couldn't transport them terribly easily. Not only that, this red line, which here's Dudley, you're going through Sedgley and up to Wolverhampton. This is a ridge that runs through this corner of the Black Country. It's deemed to be an ancient salt route, and it's part of a significant geographical divide, which separates Gornal Wood and this part of what is the edge of the Black Country from the rest of the locality. That's going to have a hugely significant effect, which means that although the Black Country is going to move forward with the earliest years of the Industrial Revolution, in many ways, Gornal and other areas on this side of the ridge are going to be slower being drawn into the Industrial Revolution because of the isolation from river transport and the fact that communication to the rest of the Black Country was limited by that ridge. Interestingly, as the canals developed in the Black Country, there were plans for a canal which would have gone from Birmingham across the Black Country and through the middle of Gornal Wood, as it happens, to Stourbridge, to link the canal system that grew out of Birmingham with the River Severn to the west. I want to show you what makes life difficult for this to be the case. So take as a reference point Tipton, which is more central to the Black Country. So you've got places like Dudley there, Bilston, Darlaston, Wednesbury, West Bromwich, Oldbury, Smethwick, Walsall, and across, of course, to Birmingham. And when the canal networks developed, you've got this massive collection of canals that emerges over time. Here's Gornal, which is around here, and there's no development at all because they can't link to anywhere. They can't get over that ridge, and so they're being held back, and they're going to be that much slower in enjoying the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. And that's emphasised by this map, which we looked at a little bit of earlier in the talk, which was put together to suggest what the township, the Constablewick of Lower Gornal, with its Gornal Wood inclusion, may well have looked like. So here is Lower Gornal, Gornal Wood, and you've got this coppice area that I mentioned earlier on, but you've got a lot of common land, you've got meadows, you've got a little bit of coal mining, but it's not going to kick off significantly for a while yet. So the relative insignificance of the Gornals in general at the turn of the 19th century, from the 18th into the 19th century, is evidence when you look at contemporary trade directories. The first one to mention Gornal at all came in Bradshaw's 1818 directory, and it mentions Gornal as part of the Sedgley parish, but when it comes to listing tradespeople, wherever they lived in Sedgley parish, they were simply listed under Sedgley. So that's it. Gornal is known to exist, it's acknowledged as existing, but it doesn't get much of a mention. And then when you look at later directories, you start to find, as the villages grow, that by the 1830s, Lower Gornal and Upper Gornal are being listed separately after Sedgley, but specific reference to Gornal Wood is not always there. Some directories simply treat it as part of Lower Gornal, and through certainly the first half of the 19th century, that was true. It tended to be disregarded in its own right. But sometimes you get references to Gornal, Lower Gornal and Gornal Wood. Sometimes you just get references to Lower Gornal. Now, if we look at numbers, we start to see something of the transformation that takes place, because it's heads that show a significant change is taking place. My dear old junior school headmaster and noted local historian Andrew Barnett did some significant research on the Gornals and on Sedgley. It's important to remember at this point, as we look at these figures, that he didn't have the benefit that modern day researchers have of being able to go on the internet and look at this, that and the other and 10 million other things as well. His research was always with original documents. And he himself admitted that the sorts of figures that we've got here could never be complete, but they just give some sort of hint of the nature of the locality and employment opportunities, what was going on. These are desperately incomplete figures, but it just shows you that nailers were hugely important in the locality, and general labourers and yeomen. Locksmiths, you're looking more to Sedgley and towards Wolverhampton, really, but these are figures for the ancient manor of Sedgley, as far as I can understand, because they're figures that are included in some material that he put together on the ancient manor of Sedgley. Butchers to feed us, and they'd get their meat from the farms that were all around the area. Schoolmasters, one. I could say a lot, but I'm not going to this evening about education opportunities or the lack of them in the locality. But there we are. Colliers start to increase in the locality by the start of the 18th century. But we start to get more complete pictures as time goes on. So here we are with a picture from the 1830s. This is taken from one of the directories of the time, and what there are here, and we could spend all evening just analysing this, but I simply illustrate that in the first column you've got the number of people in the whole of the Sedgley parish under the various headings, so 21 gentry. In Lower Gornal, excluding Gornal Wood, you've got one, that's the local vicar, and in Gornal Wood there aren't any gentry or clergy. Similarly, academies and schools, there are 12 in the parish, and there's a national school in Lower Gornal, but no school in Gornal Wood. Blacksmiths, 8 in Sedgley, none in Lower Gornal or Gornal Wood. Skip over to the other columns. Taverns and public houses, surprise, surprise, 38 in Sedgley parish, 49 retailers of beer in Sedgley parish. In Lower Gornal, 4 public houses, 2 retailers of beer. In Gornal Wood, 2 pubs, both the Bush. I presume they were different bushes, which is not unsurprising, given that there were 2 bull's heads in Gornal Wood at one time. And then 5 retailers of beer, who must have wanted to earn their living in some other way as well. And this was probably just a sideline. A more wide-ranging set of occupations in Sedgley parish. These miscellaneous references to saddlers, bellow makers, corn dealers, pike helve makers. They were wooden handles for tools, apparently. Surveyors of roads, Roman cement and iron founders, blacking makers, timber merchants, horse dealers, and the workhouse. And then go to the middle of the century, and we're able to have a look on this occasion at employment simply in Gornal wood, and here we go. 346 coal miners and then associated activities, labourers in mines, and these are the names for the occupations are taken from the census at the time, the 1851 census. A coal loader, a banksman, a bankswoman, 6 bankswomen. Women were employed around the head of the mines. Coal carriers, colliery clerks, accounts clerks, coal sales, colliery agents, coal masters. And then 231 nailers, labourers 215, stone miners 33, brickmakers 28, and these very interesting responsibilities for furnaces and sorry, that's associated activities, 18 furnace labourers, and then a whole swathe of related occupations, carpenters as well, who would have been vital to the mining industry. Carters, 2, but they would not have been able to move too much around still, and that's why other means of transport become ever more important. Toll house collector, because there was well, there were 2 toll houses at either end of the village, and 1 or 2 other related sundry occupations, and 16 people listed as receiving parish relief. So we see what people are doing, and the number of people who are doing it is significantly increased by the middle of the century. And if you go to the start of the 20th century, some of the commercial activity and occupations in Gornal wood, I was able to do this street by street because of the more detailed 1912 records that I was able to use, and oops, keeps jumping around. So a vast array of people doing a variety of jobs, and we've got a lot more coming on. So we've got grocers and shopkeepers, bank clerks even, wardrobe dealer, and this was a dealer in second-hand clothing, insurance agents, pork butchers, greengrocers, hairdressers, fried fish dealers, gasworks manager. I'll come to that in a minute. But there's a vast range now of occupations rooted in the village itself. Now, nail making. Nail making was a long time activity in Gornal wood, a cottage industry dating back to the 12th century. And while there were quite a few locations which offered nail making opportunities, well on into the 19th century and even into the early 20th century, it was still prevalent as an activity, a work activity in Gornal wood. But in the locality, that industry actually reached back into the 12th century. Pre-industrial revolution, incomes in the Black Country were incredibly limited, and When farming began to decline or fail to produce significant income in Shropshire, you had a migration of workers from Shropshire into the Black Country, including Gornal Wood. But there was a further wave later on as the Industrial Revolution developed, and it was quite often women who worked in the little outhouses where the nail making took place, but it was also a subsidiary income opportunity when life was difficult in terms of working in the coal mines. The more I've studied nail making in the Black Country, the more I become convinced that there was an 1883 description of nail makers in the Evening Star newspaper, which call them the white slaves of the Black Country. And we've not always acknowledged the way in which nail makers, and for that matter miners, were essentially like slaves tied to the work they did and the people who employed them. I can account for 4 generations of my forebears who were miners, and life was not easy, to say the least. This is a nail house in Gornal Wood. If you know the village at all, that's the Woodman Inn, and this particular structure has been preserved. It cost me 50 quid to get permission to use that photograph. That's the Staffordshire Records Office. They're the meanest of all the sources that I used for putting together slides from elsewhere, but that's another story. Now, what helped this transformation to take place? Well, we all know about Abraham Darby and his claim to be the developer of producing pig iron in a blast furnace fueled by coke. That was a significant breakthrough, and it's always said that Abraham Darby the elder was the guy who did it. This is his kiln that he used to heat up the iron for smelting. He was born, interestingly, don't tend to hear this too often, in 1678 near Dudley, and he was related to someone who I'm quite convinced actually beat him to it, but circumstance destroyed his claims to fame. And if we could have defeated Derby in that particular battle, Gornal Wood might have become as important as Colebrookdale is today. And that guy was Dudley. Whether he was a technological ancestor of Derby or a mere precursor, who knows. Dudley's record of the work that he did. This is the village of Gornal Wood, and this is Askew Bridge, where Dudley carried out his experiments. He wanted to avoid having to use trees to help with the smelting, because well, I don't think he was an early climate concern man, but the source of wood for smelting was somewhat limited and not a good idea to keep going with. One time, Dudley was up at Oxford at Balliol College, and then his father called him back. He was an illegitimate son of the then Lord Dudley. He called him back to manage his ironworks at Pensnett, where the family had large reserves of coal and iron ore. And Dudley experimented with coal in place of charcoal to smelt the iron ore. His father actually secured him a patent in 1621, which he renewed in 1638. And he demonstrated the quality of his iron for gun making at the Tower of London. That's the plus. The minus is that during the Civil War in 1645, he became the General of Ordnance to Prince Maurice, who was one of the Royalist generals. Needless to say, he was on the wrong side at the end of the Civil War. He was sentenced to death, actually, in 1648, but he survived. Coming home to discover that his business had been destroyed in the absence by local ironmasters. But whatever, things proceed. So what's helping with this isolation? Well, the Ward and Dudley family, down through ages and generations, had a huge significant impact, not just on Gornal Wood, but on the massive areas of the Black Country. In particular, John Ward, the second Viscount Dudley and Ward, who Ray Ball describes as an agent of change, and that was true in so many ways. Yes, he had the land, he had the money, and he had the parliamentary clout. He was one in many who introduced enclosure bills to Parliament, which allowed him to develop the land and what was under the land. He also encouraged canal building, which wasn't terribly beneficial, particularly for Gornal Wood, but it certainly was for the rest of the Black Country where he had an interest. And he promoted technological advances. So it's all happening in the background to make this industrial revolution possible. And of course, the area of the Black Country, and here are the upper coal measures, they are dotted throughout the Black Country. It's black, I think, because of the coal. That's what gives it its name, whatever else anybody else says. That's my consideration for what it's worth. So the natural resources there, and all the other resources required, sandstone, limestone, these were all essential, and here they all were in the locality, not least in the area around Gornal. Gornal Wood had a long history linked to coal. In 1676, when Ogilvy published his Britannia Atlas, in the bit that runs from Dudley towards Himley, yes, there's mentioned Gornal, and coal pits. The existence of coal near to the surface was well known. It was on a small scale in those early days, and here we are. Here's the centre of the village. Here's the main road going through, and if you look at this map, you can see that the roads in the middle of the village are actually quite bizarrely laid out. And that's down to the Earl of Dudley and coal, because there was a significant amount of coal accessible near to the surface. The first Earl of Dudley and the Dudley family and his offshoots had various titles at different points in time. In 1831, there's a document which shows that it was acknowledged that he allowed the villagers, most of whom had to rent their properties from him, were allowed to dig for coal in the locality, in the immediate locality of where they lived. And this is why the layout of the village is so bizarre, to say the least. So there was a long history of bits and pieces of coal being hacked out of the ground. But once Newcomen and Savory were inventing their engines, which allowed water to be pumped out of mines, it meant that mines could be dug deeper, and so this was a key to the extraction of coal and the development of the Industrial Revolution, and the benefit of what was known as a thick coal seam, which was certainly around across the Black Country and certainly in the vicinity of Gornal Wood. which was a gold mine, a black gold mine, if you like, which meant plenty of money for Dudley, employment and servitude for those who worked in the mines. Now, by the end of the 19th century, this great era of coal mining and iron smelting was struggling because the coal supplies were running out. The mines were becoming less profitable to extract coal from, and the future looked quite bleak. On the eastern side of that ridge that I mentioned earlier on, the coal was there, believed to be there at deeper depths that were much deeper than had been mined previously. And the Earl of Dudley's mining engineer, Herbert Hughes, felt that on the western side of the 30-foot seam, it was worth drilling deeper to see if there was a worthwhile amount of coal to extract. So back at the end of the 19th century, he convinced the Earl to have a go at digging deeper. They started to go down to depths that they hadn't been to before, but then the drill broke, and there was a diamond tip on the drill which cost £200, and that was damaged. And the Earl said, "Let's give up." Well, right at the start of the 20th century, Hughes persisted and eventually got the Earl to agree, and they had another go. And this time they went down to the seam, and Bagridge Colliery came into being in Gornal Wood, and that actually produced coal through until 1967, when it was deemed that it was now too costly to continue extraction. But Gornal Wood extended the coal mining opportunities for over 50 years into the 20th century, and Mr. Hughes was to be justified. Some of the consequential changes that followed from this transformation, as population grew, this led to a change in other key features of village life. So, one of Gornal Wood's claims to fame, Dudley became the first black country town to seek parliamentary permission to establish a gas country. He got that permission in 1821. The initial plans for using gas was to light the streets, and it was eventually realised that homes could be lit using gas. And while there was a lot of concern that that could be dangerous, when gas lighting was introduced into the House of Commons, that made a significant difference to its acceptance by ordinary people out across the country. Vicar of St James at the time in 1860 decided it would be good to light the parish church with gas, and so he approached Dudley Corporation saying, "Can you lay on some supplies to us?" The correspondent says that Dudley Corporation did not seem willing. Well, Gornal folk are never put off, and the locality saw the formation of the District Gaslight Company and the gasworks in Gornal Wood. This is Bird Street in Gornal Wood, and that's the caretaker's, not the caretaker's house, sorry, the manager's house. And there's a story to be told on another day that actually Gornal would end up supplying the whole of the Sedgley area with gas. Sedgley was higher up on that ridge, and the gas flowed from lower Gornal Wood up into Sedgley, and so that became the source for gas across that area. There was change in the ecclesiastical representation thanks to the growth in numbers. Prior to that population influx, the manor was served by one church, All Saints in Sedgley. This is the a characterization of the medieval building, but there's evidence of a ecclesiastical presence on this site going back to Anglo-Saxon times. Hard luck on the people of Gornal Wood. It meant an uphill 2-mile walk if they wanted their babies baptized, they wanted to get married, or they wanted to go to funerals. So you had to get up the hill to the parish church. The outcome was a new parish emerged, covering Lower Gornal and therefore Gornal Wood as well. And between 1815 and 1823, the parish church of St James was built and then actually opened in 1817. The fact that it took so long to complete was down to the fact that the depression that followed in the general peace of 1815, after we'd been fighting the French, the depression meant that money was in short supply to do things like build new churches. The free churches followed. This was the first free church in the heart of the village. It's a Methodist church. It's the first Zoar. If you know the village of Zoar, of Gornal Wood, and you have seen the building that's known as Zoar today, and you'll see it's a very different building, because this one was built in the 1850s, knocked down and replaced in 1906. The schoolroom was built in 1851, and in fact the schoolroom survived the knocking down of the church and was still in use until the beginning of the 1970s, when it was knocked down with some cottages alongside and a new schoolroom was built. But nearby in Lower Gornal proper, there was another Methodist church, well, 2 Methodist churches and a Baptist church. There's an interesting aspect to all of this, which is to do with the Roman Catholic Church. On a map of 1863 from the archives of the Dudley estate, it says here RC Church, and I can find no mention in Catholic history, which is really well documented, of this chapel existing. We know that one of the earliest Catholic priests in the area built or opened a little chapel of ease on the edge of the village between Gornal Wood and Sedgley, which didn't last terribly long. So I can't understand how this one existed, but nobody seems to claim fame to it. But there is the Zoar chapel, so they were in close proximity to one another. As an aside, disputes between the Catholics and the other denominations were quite commonplace across the whole country. And Father Tynan, who was a pretty lively Roman Catholic priest in Sedgley, where there was a church over quite a significant period of time, he used to publish pamphlets defending Catholicism against the challenges of the dissenters and the Anglicans, and he never used to mince his words. He published a 12-page pamphlet entitled "The Word to Protestants in General and to the Methodists in Particular," after members of the Wesleyan Methodist Society in Gornal Wood distributed tracts challenging Catholic teaching. And apparently the students of the nearby Catholic Sedgley Park Seminary were well known for setting out to plume their theological wings by challenging the work of the local Methodists. It all made the press. This is a note about a report: lecture on the papal aggression. On Wednesday evening last, the Reverend John Wesley Thomas delivered a lecture in the Wesleyan Chapel, Gornal Wood, on the papal aggression to a respectable and numerous audience, whose marked attention and frequent outbursts of feeling exhibited full proof of the interest this question had elicited in that apparently secluded locality. Lively times, no doubt. Changes in parliamentary representation. This chart shows you the way in which parliamentary representation developed over time. the whole of Staffordshire before the 1832 Reform Act had only 2 MPs. After the Reform Act, there were 9 constituencies. Wolverhampton had 2, and 2 particularly interesting characters elected were Charles Villiers and Henry Fowler. Charles Villiers' claim to fame is that he actually was first elected to Parliament in 1835, and he served until 1898, giving up at the age of 96, and he actually holds the claim to fame of being the longest serving MP. And then Henry Fowler, who was the first solicitor, and also interesting to me, the first Methodist to enter the cabinet, and he was later raised to the peerage and became Lord Wolverhampton. The Black Country in general, love it or hate it. I think it's fair to say that in the days prior to the museum in Dudley, generally people were embarrassed about saying they came from the Black Country. But all that seems to have changed over time, and it's something of a badge of honour to say you come from the Black Country these days. Interesting note that I came across: this grim landscape with its dark clouds and flaming chimneys led to many descriptions linking the Black Country and its individual towns and villages with the devil. Of Sedgley, it was said that he ran through the village because he wanted to minimise the time he spent there. More denigrating still was the suggestion that Gornal was made by the devil out of bits and pieces left over after the creation. But then there's this lovely story which is bringing things to an end. It's written back in the 19th century by Noakes in his book, The Ramblings in Worcestershire. He talks about the way in which nobody would want to be in Gornal, in the Black Country. To show how greatly the human race is attached to locality, and that there are feelings much stronger than those engendered by mere taste or discrimination, I need only relate that some years ago I was travelling through the district on the outside of a coach, and among the passengers was a poor girl who had been out at service a long way off for some 4 or 5 years. On catching sight of some well-known object, no doubt the church tower, she suddenly clapped her hands together with a most ecstatic delight and shouted out, "Oh, there's my dear Gornal!" We all laughed heartily, but we all admired the poor girl for this outburst of genuine feeling, undisguised as it was by the cold proprieties of modern society. And that's a sentiment that I hold dear. I left the Black Country in 1971, but it's still a dear home to me. If you want to know more about that story, that's the book that this talk is based on. It is available on eBay, or you can get details from me at that email address. And talking about the project that I started 10 years ago about Zor, that building in the middle of the village, I'm working on at the moment and hoping to publish in the autumn. But there we are. That's it. That's Gornal Wood, the transformation of a Black Country village.
Thank you, Ward. Can you hand over to Andrew to lead us through the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, thanks so much, Ward, for a fascinating talk there. Particularly interesting to me because as you probably know, I've spent many decades living in Sedgley, and very pleased that you recognise that Dudley Castle is actually Sedgley Castle,
Yeah.
which I've been telling people for years and years. I was also interested in the value of Sedgley in the Domesday Book at £10, given that Birmingham was only worth 20 shillings at the same time.
Well, there are some statistics that show that actually Sedgley, certainly at some point in the 19th century, was one of the largest localities, despite the fact that round and about it across the parish there weren't too many people around. But it was when things got going, it was actually way ahead of lots of localities.
Yes, and had a thriving local council until it was subsumed. Interesting your note of Banks women. I'm sure everybody watching and listening will know what Banks women actually were in the Black Country, which of course they were the formidable pit bonk wenches.
Yeah.
Universally known throughout the Black Country. Not a pit bonk wench was not to be trifled with by all accounts of them. I was also interested in your the quote from the newspaper. I can't remember the name of the newspaper off the top of my head. The quote was "White slaves of the Black Country."
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was probably paraphrased from a book by Robert Sherrard called "White Slaves of England."
Yeah.
And in that book, he covered nail making, local Black Country nail making and Black Country chain making. And I think that book was about 1896, 1897. But if anybody's interested, it's a fascinating book and it is available free online. You've only got to have a search for it and it's there. I suspect Ward may have disappeared to fish out a copy of it from somewhere.
No, I haven't got that one, but I've got the two other booklets that talk about the nail making industry.
Yeah, it's interesting reading. We've got a couple of questions and a comment. If anybody's got any questions or comments, please add them to the chat now. It's not too late. There's a couple of questions from Jane McQuillan. Now, the first one, I'll ask it anyway, but the first one I think you actually answered later on in your talk because Jane actually asked the question fairly early on, but I'll put it anyway in case you've got anything to add to it. Jane was saying, what is a nailer? But I say you did answer that really later on in the talk.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole story in itself in there about nail making that the nailers who worked in those little outhouses, and they would have, if they were women, they had their children in there with them. They'd hang them up on the wall. And that was pretty uncomfortable. It was a dreadful experience. They had to buy long lengths of iron from factors, and there was a famous woman factor, Mrs. Tinsley, and in Sedgley, and you had to then cut them up and make the nails, and then take them back to the supplier of the long lengths and sell them at they would then be able to sell them at their own profit. So they were white slaves, and the factors were pretty mean, and there was some double dealing over time with some of them. But yeah, perhaps we ought to have a talk on nail making sometime.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they were particularly hard done to with cheap imports, and then of course when nails are being produced by machinery.
Yeah,
absolutely awful. Eliza Tinsley, fascinating character. I'm probably you'll know. Well, took over the business after her husband died.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Tinsley's is still going as a company. I think they're in Cradley Heath. I'm not certain, but the company is still going. Jane's other question was why so many locksmiths in 1634, and where had they all gone in 1835? Not sure whether it's even possible to answer that. I don't know.
I'd love to know the answer to that myself. Because I mean, locksmiths, is it Wednesbury that became well known for locksmiths, or I mean Wolverhampton as well, because Chubbs were based in Wolverhampton.
Willenhall was the big.
That was Willenhall, yeah.
Well, still is a lock making area. Yeah. So yeah, I would say when Wolverhampton they went to Willenhall, but you know we don't know. That's a bit flippant. But certainly that was a major lock making area. And I think this is a comment from Chris actually. With regard to Dudley, there was a field in Pensnet called Furnace Field, probably the place where Dud did his experiments, now underneath Russell's Hall Hospital.
There's a guy called what was his name now? Anyway, there's a guy who wrote a very comprehensive history of the iron and steel industry, and he reckoned that Gornal Wood actually had the first blast furnace in Staffordshire, and there's that might well be the case. I mean, he's a leading authority on the history of the industry, and he identified one. I'm trying to remember when it was now. Carry on talking. I'm just looking through my notes. No, can't find it. There's evidence to show that there was a blast furnace, obviously using wood and charcoal for the process, very, very early on in Gornal Wood, and that's probably where Dudley did his work.
Yeah, interesting. And his book Metallum Mortis, I think it was, isn't it?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. He'd got at least one furnace, I think, set up not too far from where the Crooked House is or was.
Yeah, that's the locality. Yeah.
Is that it? Ah, right. Just
Yeah.
off the Himley Road.
Yeah.
Opposite
The Black Country
side.
Iron Industry by W.K.V. Gale. That's it.
Oh, Gale.
Published by the Iron and Steel Institute, so it must be right.
Yes, he's a very well-known name in iron and steel.
Yeah, blast furnace and 2 forges in Pensnett Chase, and there he began to experiment.
Ah.
Yeah.
There we are. Thanks ever so much, Ford. I'm going to hand over to Chris just to wind everything up.
Again, thank you to all of you, to Ward and for Andrew and also to George. I did make a note in chat. We might have a presentation on the VHD on Eliza Tinsley later in the year from Becky Wilton. She can't decide whether she's going to talk about Eliza Tinsley or Wolves women's football team. So it'll be one or the other. Yeah, the last meeting of again, thank you to all. The last meeting of the virtual group will be in May the 20th. And this is going to be like one we had last year, sort of memories evening where people can bring along their own memories, photos, stories, poems, whatever. So if you're interested in that, I'd urge you to think about it. I'll send a little email around about it sometime over the next week. But in that particular meeting had got about 1,300 views on YouTube, quite a staggering number of views. So it's clearly something that people were quite interested in. So please, if you want to take part in that, I'd urge you to do so. And again, to give my thanks to all involved this evening. And I'm going to say goodbye to you all now. So goodbye to everybody. Thank you.
Good night, all.